My name is Cameron Shaw, and I'm the Executive Director of the California African American Museum in Los Angeles. CAM was founded in 1977, and our mission is to research, collect, preserve, and interpret for public enrichment the history, art, and culture of African Americans, with an emphasis on California and the Western United States. So as Delphine and Ariana pointed out, we are the direct outgrowth of the Black Museum movement of the 1960s and 70s, which created other institutions like the DuSable, the Charles H. Wright, the Anacostia Museum, and the Studio Museum mentioned today. It's important to acknowledge how that work was fundamentally civic work, performed by Black people for Black people. The task of identity building, empowerment, self-sufficiency, and self-worth that was part of our fight for civil rights. With that history in mind, many people are surprised to learn that CAM is a state-supported museum and a government agency. We were the first African American museum of art, history, and culture fully supported by a state, and we are the result of a sustained multi-year campaign of activism undertaken by our visionary founders, which included politicians and legislators who wrote the legislation and secured the funding, artists and arts advocates, scholars, and historians. One of our founding historians was Lonnie Bunch, and our community members, some of which you see in this picture at our ribbon cutting for our home in Exposition Park near downtown Los Angeles in 1984. So I look at this picture a lot. It's just beautiful, but it's a reminder to myself of our rich history and the challenges faced by the many folks that came before me. So some of you will recognize in that gesture the spirit of Sankofa, a Ghanaian word that translates to go back and get, and a principle that tells us to look back at the past when preparing for our future. So I say very regularly to our staff and in settings like this that our charge at CAM is to be as visionary in 2023 as our founders were in 1977, to believe this museum should exist and that their civic work could transform the way Black people saw ourselves and educate the world. So more than 40 years after our founding, the mission and originating principle for CAM remains relevant and vital to a healthy and just America, to create and support an inclusive, accessible, and dynamic space where all people can see Black lives valued, reflected, and that our culture can be experienced. But we recognize that that doesn't mean the same thing in 2023 as it did in 1977. So the core question driving what I'm sharing here today, and I think that's really driving this symposium into the future, is what does it mean to be a Black museum in the year 2023? More specifically for us at CAM, what shape does that work take in Los Angeles, a major metropolis, a center for cultural production of all kinds, and one of the most racially and ethnically diverse cities in the world? In recent years, as Ariana so pointed out, and intensifying with national protests in response to police brutality, state-sanctioned violence, and the movement for Black lives, many historically white-centered mainstream museums have made institutional pledges to diversify and center people of color, particularly Black artists. We welcome those efforts. They're laudable, they're necessary, but this period has also allowed us, it's pushed us to clarify our own role, which is not only to center, we've been doing that for 40 years, but to develop new models and methodologies to truly support and deeply contextualize the work of Black artists, scholars, and cultural producers. So we are exploring that in a number of ways with methodologies that include new partnership models and frameworks for holistically and financially supporting Black artists in their thought work in bringing revolutionary ideas into the world. But one of the things that I want to share for you today is another opportunity that we identified, which really takes a look at institutional context and institutional history, which that's the opportunity to support sustained dialogue about the intersections of Black life and the most pressing issues of our time, and to go deep into areas of inquiry that have the power to illuminate the past and shape the future. So with this in mind, CAM has committed to 4 framing themes or investigative pillars that are guiding our exhibitions, our public programs, and publishing efforts for the next several years. They emerged really organically from conversations that I was having with our staff, artists, independent curators, and others in our community. And as we've been exploring them together, we find more and more resonance and interconnectedness among them. So I'll just briefly walk you through each of these and the questions that are fueling our exploration. So the first of the 4 pillars is Black abstraction. We are engaging in the historical role and contemporary manifestations of Black abstraction. This includes the legacy in visual arts, but also music, literature, filmmaking, comedy, and more. Our central question is, how is abstraction used as a tool, a form of practice and protest, and a framework for investigating the imperatives of legibility and the contradictory state of hypervisibility and invisibility for Black people in this country? But moreover, how does abstraction open up new avenues to explore the expansiveness of Black creativity, experimentation, and play? So I don't want to diverge too much from the pillars, but I just want to point out the work of Nikita Gale, which is above the Black abstraction. And that is, I think, a really important thing that we may talk about later today about how Black institutions also seed work for others. So this was a piece that Nikita and I worked deeply on together. It was commissioned by CAM. I was the curator for this piece. And it showed at CAM. It was supposed to show in March 2020. Obviously, that was interrupted by the pandemic. We ultimately opened it in 2021 when the museum reopened, and it just joined the permanent collection of the Hammer Museum. So that museum bought it, but we are the ones who produced it, that seeded it. It was hours of conversation in Black Museum that brought that into another collection. So I just want to flag that for you all. The second pillar is Black spirituality and ancestral technologies. We are exploring the legacy and future of Black spiritual traditions in America and throughout the African diaspora. Our central question is, how can deeper conversations and contextualization of spiritual practices inform and prepare us to confront crisis and support mental health and well-being in our communities? And how have these varied spiritual traditions anchored Black movement building from abolition to the current Black Lives Matter movement? And you'll see with that the work of Matthew Thomas, a Buddhist who began his practice in Los Angeles in 1960s and continues to make work today where he lives in rural Thailand. He came and created a full room installation, which he saw as a group of prayers to bring world peace and harmony. Our third pillar is Black lives and green justice. Here we examine the intersections between Black life and green justice efforts, and that includes advocating for safe and equitable access to green and leisure spaces, mitigating climate change, documenting shifts in agriculture and labor practices, and improving health outcomes. Our central questions are, how do communities of color lead and shape public discourse around land and natural resource use, and build new, sustainable, and healthy relationships to the environment for generations to come? So you'll see a picture at Bruce's Beach, which many of you may have been following the story of Bruce's Beach and the return of that land to the Bruce's family, which has been unfolding in the Southern California area. And this piece is going to join a show that looks at the creation of Black leisure spaces in the era of Jim Crow in Southern California and how Black people were critical to creating leisure spaces that centered California at the American dream. And our final pillar is liberating the Black archive. Through this work, we are imagining new and creative ways of making accessible Black archives in dialogue with artists, scholars, publishers, universities, and other repositories. Our central question here is, how do we make our history accessible and teachable to new generations, particularly new generations of activists and advocates who build on our rich past? So I loved hearing this morning about the work you all are doing here at Austin, and look forward to continuing conversations. So I know we'll get into more things about the history of CAM as we move through the program today, but I really wanted to introduce this idea that's guiding us right now as another way of thinking about how we situate ourselves into a new future of museum methodologies and how we're thinking about the museum right now, but really also to foreground that questions are at the forefront of the work that we're doing right now. You know, I was in a conversation with a journalist about a year ago as I was preparing for a large profile in a national newspaper, and she shared with me how difficult it is to put quotes in the form of questions in the newspaper. And that just hit me as such a critical aspect of the work that we're doing and my approach to the work as a museum director. We got into the situation we're in now because not enough people asked questions and they thought they had the answers. So really thinking about, for me, what is the importance of a museum practice that really does center questions and centers questions in dialogue with our community to honor the multi-perspectives, the multivalences of being Black in this country together. So thanks.